I've noticed a lot of people posting on social media and the various platforms as this weekend has approached commentary about the Pluto ingress into Aquarius. Everyone's saying, this is it, this is the final ingress. Which of course it isn't. The final ingress is later this year, and that will be the ultimate. But what is actually really intriguing, as some people have pointed out, is the synchronization with the sun during this transition. Now, of course, this only works if you're using Western whole sign, I believe, because the cusp boundaries are different in different house systems, of course. And sidereal is whatever, 22, 23 degrees tilted from the perspective of the Western chart. So there's ways to look at this, a lot of ways to slice it. And each way to slice it has some symbolic relevance, right? The different symbolic languages of these interpretive systems are intriguing. They are not mutually exclusive, and they're not competing against each other, right? They're all describing the same sky, the same universe. They're just using different techniques, different filters to look at it in different ways. You know, for example, we know that human vision is extremely limited to what we call the visible bandwidths of the electromagnetic spectrum, which includes, you know, on a relative scale, if this is everything, what we can see is this, you know, a tiny sliver, the thumbnail of the band, ultraviolet, X-rays, etc., etc. So in the same way that using different filters or different lenses, different optics can show us different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum, these interpretive techniques, these divination techniques, these predictive architectures that have come down through time that people have been so fascinated with are filters to look at correlations, patterns, right? In the same way that the arteries in the human eye and the alluvial fan of a tidal flat at the end of a river, or the construction of galaxies in the universe, all look the same, right? Why? Because there's an underlying physical architecture, that Fibonacci math, that is just out there, and it's underneath everything. It's the foundation. So that being true in the physical world, we then wonder, well, is that true in the softer, kind of harder to quantify world, such as events, feelings, patterns, karma, if you will? Well, apparently so. There's a very strong correlation between certain patterns, locations of relativistic locations of planets, and the design, the geometric designs that makes, are somehow correlated to events on Earth. It's wild and mind-blowing, but why not, right? We see it in the physical world, and that's mind-blowing. So it's kind of like the Fibonacci sequence goes down all the layers, even into the ephemera, right? The non-real, the non-corporeal. I'm going on this long-winded ramble because today is the day that Pluto and the Sun join hands and walk across the boundary of Aquarius together, at least in the Western whole sign system. What they do first is they join hands in Aquarius. At that last degree, 29 degrees Aquarius, they hold hands. The symbolism of the way the astrological wheel works is that each section of the sky, each 30-degree house, place of real estate is like a country, a territory. You know, like in The Lord of the Rings, Beorn, or in The Hobbit, he has this kind of walled compound and then a farm and then these forests and mountains, and that's his territory. Well, houses are like that, right? The territory of Beorn, the house of Beorn, the land that he rules, everybody knows, you know, you can come in and out of there, but he's going to enforce certain rules. And if you are an orc on a warg, he's going to come after you. That kind of thing. Different houses have different rules, different moods, different archetypes, different ways they express and engage with different forces that come in and out of them. The transition, the boundary zone, the line where that fuzzy place where you cross from one house to the other is important. And now this is true across all versions of what we call boundaries. Boundaries have been recognized in many different fields of study or ways of looking at the world as being incredibly important. So, for example, in botany, we recognize that at the boundary of a field to forest or cultivated to uncultivated, or any transition point, wetland to dry land, whatever, it's the transition boundary that it is the most biodiverse. The majority of the life biomass and activity that's happening is actually concentrated along boundary edges because there's so much exchange and potential advantage and cooperative elevation of the whole that happens in those dense areas that we push towards them. So that's in the physical, botanical world. But then, of course, we notice in the esoteric world, for example, the boundary between night and day, this morning, this dawn. We even give it a special word. Dawn and dusk describe the overlapping boundary zones between the day and night transition. And it's in those transition where nature hands off. The diurnal animals hand off to the nocturnal animals, right? And there's a huge amount of activity and change, right? It's quite stunning to watch. It's my favorite time to go walking and experience the transition of day to night or night into morning as everybody wakes up and begins singing at a certain schedule. They all have a certain schedule. So at night, the handoff between the day birds to the night birds. It's amazing to watch and witness. And it's dense with activity, with portent, with change, right? So symbolically, the transition of a planet from one house to the next house is like that transition of day to night, or night into dawn and day. That transition from seasons, that transition from the cultivated field to the wild field, that transition between energy states inside the atom. You know, when I was taught about the structure of the atom, we were told this model of shells, right, of electrons, and they lived within this shell, and when they got more energy, then they popped up to the next shell. This is, now we know, not like what it is at all, and you know, we've changed how we teach things, and then just in the last year or two, we've realized that even that's wrong. Man, the James Webb telescope is changing everything we thought we knew about astrophysics. It's just saying, nope, got to go back and review that, right? We're constantly learning what we don't know. Anyway, I got off on a tangent. So, the density of boundary zones archetypally in physical matter and in ideas. Big deal. It's like when you throw a rock in a pond. That itself is a transition zone as well. The surface of the water is a boundary zone, right? Air, water. That boundary in the physical is different because of how water molecules adhere. They actually do form a skin, right? So you throw that rock and it goes poop, big burst of energy because it has to go through that transition zone. And that causes waves to radiate outward in all directions. Boom. So it's like a gong hit at the piercing of the veil and then radiating energy outwards. So, in exactly the same way as that rock in a pond, when a planet transitions, And remember, these planets are archetypal ideas, symbols. The houses are archetypal ideas. All this is symbolic language, right? As that rock pierces the veil, boom, it's a big hit of energy that radiates outward. This symbolically is what we are looking at when a Pluto and the Sun cross from Capricorn into Aquarius. It's like a boulder dropped into a high mountain lake. Poop! Sound and radiant energy of waves immediately apparent, and then ongoing repercussions, possibly for many minutes, and therefore symbolically many years in this case, of impact. Now, what kind of impact? Well, in the real world, the rock into the pond, it's a physical strike. But in the symbolic world of emotions and events on Earth and cultural trends and memes and collective ideas and the consciousness of all, it's going to be manifest somewhat different. But it's archetypally probably going to be that ploop, that oomph of energy. Something's going to be noticeable, right? Maybe in politics, an announcement, somebody drops out of the race today. Actually, didn't Vivek just drop out and join with Trump? I mean, maybe it's that. It could be things like that. Symbols of sudden things that happen, or, a revelation of a big dark secret of somebody, or, some change in something, some kind of shock, some kind of ploop. Ploop, that's the formal term. Will probably happen this weekend. Now, in the same way that the radiant circles of waves go out from the rock, the impact of the archetypal energetic signature of the ingress into a new house sends energy, just like on the lake, forwards and backwards in time. Right? Stay with me here. The big hit is that it crosses that point in the chart, night to day, ploop, surface of the water. But the radiant energy goes outward in all directions. So you can feel the impact of the ingress before, in a strength way leading up to the moment, and after, right? And it's in those waves and troughs of the radiant energy of the ingress, if they happen to overlap with some of your natal placements pre-existing underneath that, it's like rogue waves. You can feel something wildly more impactful than someone else does. And this is why we all feel differently about Pluto and the Sun. That's a global transition. Everyone has that. But we may feel it differently because of how those waves interact with our personal charts. So that's sort of an explanation for why this moment of ingress, symbolically, archetypally, is why everyone's talking about it. Because it's the ploop, it's the gong hit. We've been feeling it leading up. We will continue to feel it afterwards. But this range of time, and of course in sidereal astrology, it's a few days or weeks before or after this, right? So it's in the various different houses are going to experience this at different times. And I think there's something legitimate about all those systems. So we're in this season of hits that are all happening archetypally around now. And I think you can make that case by just looking at the headlines. So Capricorn into Aquarius is intriguing globally and for me personally. Capricorn is my 10th house. Now, the 10th house is it's the high point, the most visible part of your chart. The chart is a circle, and it represents many things. It represents the day, it represents a year, it represents your life, right? And much in the same way as the Native American Church does their symbol in the peyote ceremony, the half circle on top is the daylight or your life above the earth, and the bottom part is the night hemisphere, or your time at night in dreams, or your time in death between births, right? It holds all of that symbolism there. Remember, our astrology is not a personality system. It's a snapshot of your life. It's not just about you. It's about your life. And your life includes where you live, who you work for, your relationship with your parents, your relationship with partners, your siblings, your neighborhood, your pets. Like it's all in there. It's not just about you, right? But this 10th is where people see you most visibly. So we say it's probably your career, or at least your reputation, your influencer status, if you will, right? How many followers you have. That's 10th house stuff. But it's also, that's the control, domination, kind of father figure, patriarchy, some of the dark side of that symbol set as well. And that's going into the house of the people, Aquarius, this strange alien collective, liberated, also trapped. There's some really complex symbols in the 11th house of Aquarius. It's some really complicated and sometimes contradictory and nuanced thing, and I'm not going to go into all of that. Suffice to say, it's a very different energy, which is why we notice this transition. Now, I say very different. Aquarius and Capricorn are both Saturn-ruled signs, so there is some archetypal consistency here, at least in the Hellenistic way of looking at it. In the modern way of looking at it, Aquarius has a Uranian aspect, and this is appropriate, basically because the modern attributes of the planets discovered in the modern era effectively took aspects of the 7 original Hellenistic and spread them out among the outer planets. So you can read a chart successfully without any of the modern outer planets. It's still there. All the symbolism is there. We just get some extra clues by the way we have begun working with these outer planets. And this, you've got to realize, Pluto is what is discovered in the 40s, I think, or something like that. Like, it's extremely modern. And then we realized, oh, it's actually just one of a number of objects, Kuiper Belt objects, that all might have as big an impact, except that Pluto was the first one discovered of them. So karmically, symbolically, it has something that's special, that makes it different than Chiron. Even though Chiron is bigger, Pluto has captured something in the imagination, so much so that children of the world revolted when Pluto was demoted from planet to dwarf planet. People were like not happy with that. The fact that there's public consciousness around it tells me that archetypally there's something big and important about Pluto that's different than, say, Chiron or the other Kuiper Belt objects, despite anything we might say astronomically about it. But that's a side tangent. Pluto's impact, the fact that it's captured the imagination, the fact that the myth of Pluto, the Platonic, the Hades, the underworld, the fact that that dark, patriarchal, immensely wealthy, immensely powerful archetype is so potent now, when in fact that is the cultural dialogue. How have we allowed the foxes to run the henhouse? Why have we've suddenly woken up and realized that the system has been gamed by an elite few to bend the rules so that it works to their advantage and no one else's, right? It's the rule of the few. We have a plutocracy problem on this planet, right? We started having warlords and centralized leaders, who knows, maybe 10,000 years ago or so. That started to become a thing, and it got bigger and bigger. And then we started having empires, right? And then we have the modern empires, of which America is just the most recent title holder. And what we are seeing now is a transition of that title of global empire is being disputed. It's actually expensive for America to continue doing that, and we don't want to anymore. So the global order is breaking down because the agreements that were made after World War II, where we said, all right, we'll come in and help, but you got to give all the advantage to us. And that's what happened. And we've had all the advantages since then. Now we're tired of it, and the world is tired of it. So that is an imperial transition phase, which is a big deal. Again, another boundary cross, another ploop, change of empires. And of course, those kind of changes take decades to happen. And in the case of the Roman Empire, it took centuries to happen, right? It just, these things, it's a slow catabolic collapse. Sort of John Michael Greer has been the most prescient commentator on catabolic collapse or the slow empire. It's not, we've been trained on Hollywood. Everything is a meteor impact and a sudden climax in the third act of a 90-minute movie, right? And it might be that, but it usually isn't. It usually takes decades or centuries for these things to roll out. So that's probably what we're looking at here, a transition. And we can do it as peacefully or as warlike and as chaotic as we decide to do it. That's a decision, right? We are at the transition, but how we navigate it, how we prosecute the change of ages is up to us. So Pluto couldn't be a more appropriate symbol. It's change at this time. But for me, personally, going back to my own chart, this transition from the 10th to the 11th house has followed the dates exactly of my working at Flower Essence Services. I started in 2008 when Pluto entered my 10th house, and now I'm still there, 15 years at the same company. And it's not that I'm leaving, it's that the world is changing and how I think about what I do is changing. And I'm noticing that in my personal expression, I went for those years mostly working privately in that little space. And now I'm beginning to talk about it online. So I'm expanding my presence, who I am in what I do, into a new area, a more networked, decentralized, more public, open, Aquarian type of expression, right? I've gone from a silent practitioner to one who is speaking more publicly. That's a Capricorn to Aquarian sort of transition that's happening in my life. And I think that's happening also much more globally. Suddenly the consciousness of these things, the fact that we're even talking about this esoteric symbol set in a serious way about current events that are material and substantive in form is interesting, right? This is a legitimate conversation. It's not woo-woo. It's just a different filter of looking at reality because we know our vision is limited. We know that. So whatever tools or technologies we can come up with to see the world differently is informative and interesting. Right? Anyway, a disorganized ramble. Happy Pluto and Sun transitioning from Capricorn to Aquarius today. Be well, my friends.